Oh, I'd like to welcome Dr. McNamara. This is Kate McNamara, and I'm so glad to have you here with us today on just our very second version of the podcast. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So there's so much that we can talk about. I think each of the topics that we've considered talking about today could be in and of itself an all-day seminar and session. So this is just intended to be an overall kind of global introduction to some of the things that we're thinking about in psychology and how it relates to family law. I was looking at your CV and it's, just so extensive. And I know you'd be too humble in how you would introduce yourself. So I just want to point out a few things about you. So you've been a licensed psychologist for how long?
38 years in April.
Okay, 38 years. And the things that kind of stuck out to me was just a huge amount of work in, I'm just going to read through some of these, the American Academy of Forensic Psychology, the American Psychological Association. I see you've done a lot of leadership and training in child abuse, domestic violence, risk assessments, parental, I guess we'd call them custody evaluations before, but more parental responsibilities, I think is more the term we use now. I know you have served in the past as a parental responsibilities evaluator here in Colorado, and it looks like you've also been on the Colorado Supreme Court Standing Committee, looking at legislative issues in family law, including something that I'm really interested in, the Child Focused Innovative Practices Subcommittee, which sounds really good and what we need more of. Um, Editorial Board of Family Court Review since 2018, and then I'm also excited to see that you're going to be president, vice president, then president of the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts nationally here, in the next 2 years or so, and you're on the executive team now. So
I'm on the executive committee now. Yeah, it's a rise up.
yeah, so just so many different ways you're involved. I always call you just a rock star, world class, locally and nationally. And I know you've also, for me and others, trained parenting coordinators and decision makers, and have a lot of role in that. And then you and I just personally have been able to work on a lot of cases together as I've morphed into doing more child legal representation. And when I need somebody that can really do a good job, particularly on resist and refuse teenagers, you and I have had a lot of cases together. So, what else have you done that I didn't include? That's so many wonderful things.
Well, I've done a lot of things because I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
I would simply add that I began my career after I got my PhD 100 years ago. I began as an academic psychologist. That's where I started. And I was really interested in clinical mental health problems, particularly as they pertain to women and girls. And I was a university professor for the first 14 years of my career. And during that time, I became acquainted with the problems that happen with families who are involved in the court system. And so early in my career as an academic psychologist, I learned about families who are involved in domestic relation cases and other kinds of cases, and became fascinated in
Yes.
actually the clinical work with these families and assessment and evaluation of the issues and the intersection between mental health or psychology and the law, and eventually decided to leave academia and focus on actual practice. And of course, later in my career, I've become much more interested in professional service and policy and moving the field forward.
Just for a little quick background, we had Kayden's Law in Pennsylvania, with Kayden, who was a little girl, I think 7 or 8 years old, was caught up in the domestic relations court between her parents with fundamental parenting rights, which is a United States constitutional right of parents to be able to parent, which sometimes frustrates people because they say, "Why don't you just terminate this person's rights?" But that doesn't happen in our domestic relations court. So there can be many, many years of conflict, short of somebody's rights being terminated, which doesn't happen in those cases and can't. And in that case with Kayden, the mother did not think that the father was safe because of domestic violence, and the court awarded parenting time anyway. And the little girl was killed by her father, leading to that mother to be very involved in legislation to change that in Pennsylvania, which then became federally, statutorily the feds have to do this through the states basically to say, we want you, we're going to give you money. We've got this new legislation that we want you to adopt, each state. And then Colorado was one of the first maybe after that, to adopt Kayden's law locally, which is codified now in CRS, covered by statute 1410-127.5. Um, so I know you're aware of all that, but just to give that kind of background, I know that this is then the second, I think this year, that was in 2023, 2024, we had a bunch of other statutory changes, which are not codified in a particular bill. They are House Bill 24. Let me restate that. They're House Bill 241350, but it makes changes to a bunch of different statutes. So I can't point to one statute as changing, but a bunch of them changed through that House bill. And that I think goes into effect very beginning of August, 2024. So I know you were part and I was part of listening at least to testimony, and there were very many people testifying as to some of the early versions of these bills. I know that some of these psychological associations had some concern about some of the things that were being proposed. Things like,
Well, there's certainly secondary gains sometimes to some of the dysfunctional behavior that we all engage
yeah,
in. And
yeah,
I think that that's what you're keen into here. I think we humans, um, when we feel very strongly about something, or we're afraid or worried about something, and these families are dealing with very intense, complex emotions.
yeah,
Um, it's very hard for us to see our contribution to the dynamic. It's hard for us to see it. What we feel so strongly and experience so strongly is what is being done to us, or what is perceived as being done to us, or has in the past been done to us. And again, I want to qualify abuse and violence.
totally different.
That
Yeah,
requires a different
yeah,
conversation, but where we're talking about families where
yeah,
that's not the issue. There are other issues going on here. Um, that is the hard work of therapy. Is you're going to have a hard time. We can teach you these skills for dispute resolution, for business-like communication, how to support your child, how to avoid behaviors that can be undermining and discouraging. We can teach you these behaviors, and often that is where we start.
mhm,
And I monitor our, adherence to that. We start with behaviors, but where we're really going to get traction is when you feel differently
yeah,
about your co-parent, where you let go of move on with your life,
mhm,
and accept what you can control and what you can't control, and accept that your child's relationship is not the same as your relationship. Learn about resiliency for you and your children, how to promote it. That is the real guts of therapy, is when emotions and attitudes begin to change, outlooks begin to change, things really calm down. And it does happen. People come in kind of hopeless.
yeah,
Oh, they're never going to change. You have no idea what we've gone through. I hear it every day. You have no idea. It's so hopeless. It's so broken. You won't believe this is the worst case you've ever heard. You just don't know what I'm dealing with.
right,
And well, okay, let's talk about what you're dealing with, because I want that mindset to change. And that takes time. It just doesn't happen quickly. And I do believe that if the co-parenting relationships were improved, the work with parent-child problems would be much easier.
mhm,
But it is extremely difficult to work with the co-parent dynamic. It is very difficult. And as a family therapist, to work with the co-parent dynamic and the parent-child, and it becomes a little overwhelming. The national models are
right,
you really need at least two therapists working. Well, this becomes very expensive.
right,
It- I don't have a good answer for that. I tend to focus on the parent-child relationships, knowing full well that where I might get the biggest bang for my buck is to improve that co-parenting relationship, which I try to
right,
do.
right,
But in some cases, the prognosis is so poor there. They're so gridlocked. They're so unwilling,
mhm.
that I'm just not going to get a good return on investment if I focus there. So these are some of the
Okay.
really complex problems we run into.